Sarah had always been a woman of routine. Her life, though quiet, was peaceful. She lived alone in an old house on the outskirts of town, a place that had been in her family for generations. The walls of the house had seen a lot over the years, laughter, arguments, silence, but now it was just Sarah. She worked as a librarian, spending her days among books and her evenings in the comforting solitude of her home. The creaks and groans of the house, once familiar, now felt like something else. There were nights when Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. It wasn't anything specific, just a sense of being watched, of something moving just beyond her reach. It started off small, a faint murmur here and there, like the distant sounds of a conversation, though there was no one else around. Sarah tried to ignore it at first. Old houses made strange noises. It was just the plumbing or the wind. But the voices grew clearer. One evening, while sitting on the couch with a book, she heard them again. This time they were louder, clearer, and unmistakably coming from the other side of the wall. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house. The voices were too distinct, too human. They whispered softly as if trying not to be heard, but she could make out some words. Help us, and then nothing. She waited, but the silence that followed was deafening. Was it her imagination? Sarah couldn't tell, but she knew one thing. Something was happening in that house, and she needed to find out what it was. The next day she decided to investigate. Sarah spent the next few days obsessing over the sounds. She tried to rationalize it, pipes, electrical wiring, maybe even the house settling, but none of it explained the whispers that echoed through the walls. One evening, after another long day at the library, she returned home to an unsettling stillness. The house felt colder than usual, the shadows longer. She decided it was time to investigate the wall where the voices seemed to originate. Armed with nothing more than a flashlight and a deep sense of unease, Sarah pressed her ear to the wall in her living room. She held her breath, straining to listen. There it was again, a soft murmur, almost like a sigh. She froze. The voice was unmistakably there, but it was still too faint to make out clearly. Sarah followed the sound, walking cautiously down the narrow hallway to the back of the house. The sound seemed to come from a small, hidden room that Sarah hadn't used in years. It was a storage room, filled with old furniture and boxes of forgotten memories. She had never given it much thought, but now it seemed like the source of the disturbance. Sarah pulled open the door, dust swirling around her as she stepped inside. The room was dark and musty, filled with the scent of age. She flipped on the light, revealing stacks of old furniture and piles of things that hadn't seen daylight in decades. She felt a pang of unease, the air thick with the weight of forgotten history. She moved toward the far wall, where a large, cracked mirror hung. It was an antique, one that had belonged to her grandmother. As Sarah approached, she noticed something strange, a faint crack in the wall behind the mirror. Her heart raced. She had never noticed it before. Something wasn't right. Sarah gently removed the mirror from the wall and peered into the cracks. That's when she saw it. A small, narrow space beyond the wall, like a hidden room. Her pulse quickened as she realized the voices she had been hearing had been coming from this very spot. With a trembling hand, she reached for a crowbar she had found nearby and pried at the crack. The wall gave way, revealing a narrow passage leading deeper into the house. Sarah hesitated, her mind racing. But the voices were growing louder, more desperate. With no other choice, she stepped into the dark passageway, the air growing thick with a strange energy. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. Sarah moved carefully through the narrow passage, her flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. The voices were now clear, and they were not just whispers, they were urgent, filled with panic. She followed the sounds deeper into the unknown part of the house, the air growing colder with each step. Eventually she came to a small, hidden room, its walls lined with old books and dusty furniture. In the centre of the room an ancient chest sat, its lock rusted and worn. The voices were coming from inside the chest. Sarah's heart pounded as she approached it. She knew she had to open it, but a voice deep inside her warned her to stop. Ignoring the fear creeping into her mind, she reached for the chest and unlocked it. As the lid creaked open, a wave of cold air rushed out, and Sarah recoiled. Inside the chest there were no bodies, no ghosts, just old letters and journals, yellowed with age. She picked up one of the journals and began to read, her hands shaking as she flipped through the pages. The journal belonged to her great-grandfather, a man she had never met. The words inside were chilling. It spoke of a secret hidden beneath the house, a dark pact made long ago. Her great-grandfather had written about hearing voices from the walls, voices that had been trapped there by a curse. The voices were those of people who had once lived in the house, souls bound to its walls, unable to escape. Sarah's blood ran cold as she read on. The voices were calling for release, but there was more. The curse could only be broken if someone willingly took their place. The voices would not stop until someone did. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The voices had been calling to her, not for help, but to replace her. Sarah's mind spun as she realized the gravity of what she was facing. If she stayed in this house, the voices would never stop, and she would never be free. Sarah sat frozen, the journal trembling in her hands as the voices grew louder in her ears. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the horrifying truth. The voices in the walls weren't the sounds of ghosts. They were the trapped souls of people who had lived here before, bound by an ancient curse. The only way to free them and herself was to sacrifice someone else. But Sarah wasn't ready to give up. She had to find a way out of this, to escape the house and the voices that haunted it. The problem was she couldn't leave. The house was alive with energy, the walls themselves pulling her back, making her feel as if she was trapped in a nightmare. That night Sarah sat down and began to research. She searched through every book, every document she could find about the house and its history, but there was nothing. No records, no accounts, nothing that explained why the curse existed or how it could be broken. In a moment of desperation, she decided to confront the voices directly. She would face them, demand to know the truth, and find a way to break the curse once and for all. She had nothing left to lose. The next evening, Sarah stood in the centre of the room, where the voices had first begun. The air was thick with tension, the house holding its breath as if it knew what was about to happen. She spoke aloud, her voice echoing in the silent house. "I know who you are, I know what you want, but I will not give in to this curse. I will find another way." The voices responded almost immediately, their whispers growing louder, as if angry at her defiance. "You cannot escape. You are part of this house now. You belong to us." The room seemed to close in on Sarah, the walls pulsating with an eerie, unnatural energy. It felt as though the house itself was alive, feeding off her fear, drawing her closer to its dark heart. But Sarah stood firm. She refused to be intimidated. "I will break this curse," she said, her voice steady despite the growing chaos around her. "You will not have me." For a moment there was silence. The voices stopped, and Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Then a cold laugh echoed through the room, the sound vibrating in her bones. "You can try," the voice said, "but in the end, you will join us." The next morning, Sarah's mind was made up. She couldn't run from the house any longer. The curse was real, and it had been calling to her for a reason. It wasn't just about the voices, it was about her bloodline, about the pact her ancestors had made. She knew what she had to do. With a final determined breath, Sarah approached the hidden room in the basement, the place where the curse had begun. She lit a candle, and as she spoke the words from the journal, the air grew heavy, the ground beneath her feet vibrating. The voices returned, their whispers growing louder and louder until they were deafening. But Sarah didn't flinch. She finished the incantation, and the room went still. The voices fell silent. For the first time in days, the house was completely quiet. The curse was broken. As Sarah stood in the silence of the house, she knew one thing for sure. She had won. The voices would never haunt her again. The house had no more power over her.